million applications this year.
Time for questions has now elapsed. So, next business. A repeat of an answer to an urgent question asked in the House of Commons today. The arrests of Cardinal Zen, Margaret Ng, Hui Po Kuing and Denise Ho in Hong Kong, Lord Goldsmith of Richmond Park.
My Lords, with leave of the House, I shall now repeat the answer to an urgent question in the other place from my honourable friend, the Minister of State for Europe and North America, James Cleverly. The Hong Kong authorities' decision to target leading pro-democracy figures, including Cardinal Zen, Margaret Ng, Hui Po Kuing, and Denise Ho, under the national security law, is unacceptable. Freedom of expression and the right to peaceful protest, which are protected in both the Joint Declaration and the Basic Law, are fundamental to Hong Kong's way of life. We continue to make clear to mainland Chinese and Hong Kong authorities our strong opposition to the national security law, which is being used to curtail freedoms, punish dissent, and shrink the space for opposition, free press, and civil society. In response to the imposition of the national security law, as well as wider recent developments in Hong Kong, the UK took three major policy actions. First, on the 31st of January 2021, we launched a bespoke immigration route for British nationals overseas and their dependents. Secondly, we've suspended the UK-Hong Kong extradition treaty. And thirdly, we've also extended the existing arms embargo on China to cover Hong Kong. China remains in an ongoing state of non-compliance with the joint declaration, which it willingly agreed to uphold. As a co-signatory to the joint declaration and in the significant 25th year of our handover, we will continue to stand up for the people of Hong Kong, to call out the violation of their rights and freedoms, and to hold China to their international obligations. The Foreign Secretary is in regular contact with her international counterparts on issues relating to Hong Kong, and we continue to work intensively within international institutions to call on China to live up to its international obligations and responsibilities. As the Foreign Secretary set out in the latest six-monthly report published on the 31st of March, the UK will continue to speak out when China breaches its legally binding agreements and when it breaks its promises to the people of Hong Kong.
My Lords, I thank the Noble Lord the Minister for repeating that statement. Of course, John Lee, Beijing's handpicked choice as Chief Executive, who is Hong Kong's top security official, oversaw the government's strong-handed response to the 2019 pro-democracy protests, and the first year of its national security crackdown. Lee has already indicated his intention to bring further restrictions on Hong Kong's freedoms and suggests that these arrests will not be the last. When this issue was raised in the Commons earlier, James Cleverly was unable to explain why the government has not yet implemented Magnitsky sanctions against Hong Kong and Chinese officials responsible for these serious breaches. Will these arrests bring a change of approach by the UK government? Will we see speedier action? The Minister in the other place was also unable to confirm whether any urgent representations had been made to the Chinese embassy on this matter. I hope the Noble Lord the Minister can assure us today that this has happened.
My Lords, on the 9th of May, we released a joint statement with our G7 partners and the EU, underscoring our grave concern over the selection process for the Chief Executive in Hong Kong as part of a continued assault on political pluralism and fundamental freedoms. And together we urged the new Chief Executive, John Lee, to respect protected rights and freedoms in Hong Kong as provided for in Hong Kong's own basic law. The current nomination process and the resulting appointment clearly are a stark departure from the aim of universal suffrage as set out in Hong Kong's basic law, and this further erodes the ability of Hong Kongers to feel or be legitimately represented. On the issue of sanctions, the Foreign Secretary, the former Foreign Secretary, on the 6th of July 2020, announced the global human rights sanctions regime, which was welcomed across both houses. we will continue to consider designations under the global human rights sanctions regime, but I'm not able to speculate, and nor should I speculate, who may be designated in future. That would undermine the impact of those designations. But I very much note the comments of the Noble Lord.
My Lords. Oh, sorry. I'm grateful. I think it's normal practice. I agree with the Minister when he says it's unacceptable, and I also support the three measures. But whilst these gross breaches of human rights are being carried out, the UK is actively promoting financial investment, financial direct investment from Hong Kong authorities into the UK and UK investment into Hong Kong. It's gone up by 8.6% from the UK to Hong Kong, and it went up by 31% from Hong Kong to the UK. Are there any, I've been trying to pursue this with the government, are there any triggering mechanisms on human rights abuses that the government would act on closing market access for Chinese investment into the UK? Because we are not acting strongly enough.
My Lords, the government monitors the operation and functioning of the financial sector and its participants on a regular and ongoing basis, and it does so across a very wide range of matters. Fundamentally, it's for businesses themselves to make their own judgment calls, and the government doesn't comment on issues relating to individual companies. But the sentiments and the message of the Noble Lord will have been heard by colleagues in the Foreign Office.
My Lords, given that the 612 Humanitarian Relief Fund did little more than fund legal aid for protesters through the 2019 pro-democracy movement and closed its operations in 2021, is it not an outrage that one of those arrested should be 90-year-old Cardinal Joseph Zen, along with other trustees? With Cardinal Zen being, as Lord Patton has said, one of the most important figures in the Catholic Church in Asia, may I ask the Noble Lord the Minister to state in his own words, as clearly as possible, that this is utterly unacceptable, further undermines the rule of law in Hong Kong, and what interventions have been and will be taken to protect religious freedom or belief in the territory?
My Lords, may I very strongly echo the comments of the Noble Lord, the prelate. And I know that any Minister of Government would be willingly do so as well, were they standing in a dispatch box. What has happened to Cardinal Zen is truly appalling on every conceivable level and fundamentally undermines every aspect of the agreement we reached with China at the handover, and fundamentally undermines any sense of plurality or freedom of religion within Hong Kong. And we're committed to defending freedom of religion for all, promoting respect between different religious and non-religious communities. Freedom of expression, religion or belief are explicitly included in the joint declaration, which China agreed to uphold. China is in clear breach of that declaration. We've seen their use of the national security law to curtail freedoms and suppress any dissent. And
Lords, I'm sure the House will welcome the integrity shown by Lords Reid and Hodge in no longer legitimising Hong Kong's broken judicial system by continuing to sit on those courts. Other members of this House continue to give cover to it by continuing their connection, and we wait for them to reconsider their roles. But my brief question to the Minister is this. Will the government consider the report by Hong Kong Watch, which proposes to conduct an audit of UK assets owned by Hong Kong officials and lawmakers? According to Hong Kong Watch, 5 officials and 6 lawmakers hide their wealth who are complicit in these ongoing human rights crackdowns and who hide their wealth in this country. If we're going to prepare for future Magnitsky sanctions, we need to start conducting that audit now.
I thank the Noble Baroness for raising an important point. On the 14th of March this year, the Foreign Secretary, the current Foreign Secretary, issued a statement on the unjustifiable action taken against the UK-based NGO Hong Kong Watch. The action is clearly an attempt to silence those who stand up for human rights in Hong Kong, and attempting to silence voices globally that speak up for freedom and democracy is unacceptable, will never succeed. And I will, of course, convey her request back to colleagues in the FCDO.
Lords, I too want to roundly condemn the arrest of the 5 members of the Humanitarian Support Fund. I just want to mention, so that the House knows, that what they have been charged with is an offence under the National Security Law, this new law that has concerned this House in previous debates. And the allegation is that they have been in collusion with foreign forces. And so it means that many of us who would want to be in contact with people don't do that because we're fearful as parliamentarians in this country of doing so in case it in any way puts in difficulties people in Hong Kong who are pro-democracy. Margaret Ng, I strongly endorse what the Bishop has said about the Cardinal, which is a shameful business. Margaret Ng is a world-renowned rights defender, a great lawyer, barrister, 18 years a parliamentarian, a great Democrat, and she is celebrated for her work and honoured for it globally. Only in 2019 was she given the International Bar Association, she and Martin Ng, a senior counsel in Hong Kong, they were honoured for that. Judges from this jurisdiction should no longer be sitting in Hong Kong, and I hope that the government will make that statement about their position. And also that we should be now calling a halt, a pause on trading negotiations with both Hong Kong and China until the situation in Hong Kong improves.
My Lords, we have repeatedly stated our very strong opposition to the national security law and will continue to voice our concerns about the legislation, which has been very clear breach of the joint declaration. And it's not a coincidence, I don't think, that the 4 people about whom we're having this urgent debate were arrested. These are people who stood up for democracy, who are standing up there for Hong Kongers as a whole. And the authorities there have made a decision to target those leading pro-democracy figures, and their decision is clearly unacceptable. The right to peaceful protest, which is protected in both the Joint Declaration and Hong Kong's basic law, is fundamental to Hong Kong's way of life, and we will continue to raise our concerns at every opportunity.
My Lords, I declare my Lords, I
didn't ask my question. My question was, will there be sanctions against, as others have written?
I'm sorry.
My Lords, I declare my interest as a patron of Hong Kong Watch and as Vice Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Hong Kong. My Lords, isn't it outrageous that a venerable and holy 90-year-old man with immense global moral authority and his fellow trustees, isn't it a terrible indictment of the CCP, illustrating the fear that has led them to criminalising most forms of dissent under the national security law, which was introduced by Carrie Lam and by John Lee? And if I can say to the House that as someone who, along with the Noble Baroness, Lady Kennedy of the Shores, has been sanctioned by the CCP, I find it passing strange that Carrie Lam and John Lee, even though the Minister can't name them as people who will be indicted under Magnitsky sanctions, have not been already given their responsibility for the destruction of 2 systems, 1 country. I agree with what has been said about the need for an asset audit, which I previously called for, on CCP apparatchiks who own assets in property in London, and I hope the Noble Lord, the Minister, who has said he will take this back to the Department, will do that as a matter of urgency. And, my Lords, given that the UK trade and economic deals, JETCO and EDF, were suspended in response to the national security law, and that with human rights in freefall, will the Minister agree that there can be no possible reason now to suspend the prohibitions on those trade arrangements?
My Lords, look, again, I strongly endorse the Noble Lord's comments on Cardinal Zen. Arresting a 90-year-old person of any standing, but particularly someone of his standing, is obscene and has been condemned, and rightly so, across both houses and really across the world. I would suggest the Noble Lord wears his own prescription by the CCP as a badge of honour. I can't go into any more details around the sanctions regime, but I can assure the Noble Lord and others here today that the very strong feelings of the House will be conveyed by me to the FCDO, to colleagues there.
My Lords, I beg to move the House to now adjourn. that the House do now adjourn.